I woke up from a coma to discover my husband had stolen everything. Not just my money, everything. While I was fighting for my life, he was planning his escape with another woman. But what I found when I dug deeper made my blood run cold. This is the story of how I went from victim to victor. And if you think you know how this ends, you don't. Before I tell you how I made him pay, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're going through your own nightmare right now, you're not alone. Hit subscribe if you want to hear how a woman who lost everything took back her power. Now here's what really happened. I woke up feeling the sterile chill of the hospital room wrap around me like a shroud. My eyes fluttered open, the harsh fluorescent lights blurring into a haze before my vision sharpened enough to recognize the pale walls and the rhythm of machines beeping softly beside the bed. Months, how many exactly I couldn't tell, had passed since I'd lost consciousness. The last thing I remembered was the crash, the screeching tires, and then nothing. Now I was here awake, but the world outside felt alien. But before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps give me the strength to speak my truth. Now let's get into my story. The nurse hovering nearby caught my gaze and offered a gentle smile, but I could see the tired lines etched into her face. "You're awake," she said softly. Her voice was a balm and a jolt all at once. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and raw. So I settled for blinking, trying to make sense of where I was and how much time had slipped away. My mind was foggy, a jumble of fragmented memories and shadows. The first test came when I reached for my phone. It was dead, completely drained after months of neglect. When the nurse helped me plug it in, the screen flickered to life, and I saw dozens of missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Bill collectors, insurance companies, lawyers. My heart began to race as I scrolled through voicemails that painted a picture I couldn't yet comprehend. What had happened while I was gone? As the days passed, I began to piece together the reality of my situation. The doctors and therapists told me I was lucky to have survived, but the victory felt hollow. I longed for normalcy, the comfort of my home, the familiar rhythm of my life before the accident. I imagined returning to the arms of my husband, to the life we had built, but there was a growing unease that gnawed at me beneath the surface of hope. The first red flag appeared during what should have been a joyful reunion. When my husband finally visited, he couldn't meet my eyes. His kiss felt mechanical, his embrace hollow. "I'm so glad you're okay," he said, but his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. When I asked about our home, our plans, our future, he deflected with vague reassurances that everything would be fine. But his hands were shaking. It wasn't until I was discharged that the full weight of betrayal crashed down. The hospital's social worker handed me a folder, thick and unyielding, filled with papers I barely understood at first glance. Bills, statements, notices, things that should have been mundane, but now felt like shards piercing my chest. My husband's name was stamped across every page, but not in a way that comforted me. He had emptied our joint bank accounts, siphoning the funds like a thief in the night, leaving me with nothing but a cold, hollow silence where security once lived. The numbers told a story more devastating than any novel. Our emergency fund, $0. Our vacation savings, $0. The account we'd been building for a house down payment, $0. But there was more, new accounts I'd never seen, opened in his name alone, with balances that made my stomach lurch. He hadn't just taken our money. He'd been planning this long before my accident. I sat on the edge of my bed in the small apartment a friend had arranged for me. The papers spread out like a testament to a life unraveling. The numbers blurred before my eyes, but the message was clear. He had taken everything. The money we saved for emergencies, for vacations we dreamed of, for a future that was supposed to be ours, gone. It was as if while I lay unconscious, he had been quietly dismantling the foundation beneath my feet. Memories came flooding back, unbidden and sharp. The quiet evenings we spent planning our future, the shared smiles over morning coffee, the way I trusted him without question. I had never imagined that the man who held my hand through every hardship could be the one to betray me so thoroughly. The realization was a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless and trembling. But then I remembered something that made my blood run cold. 3 weeks before my accident, I'd found a credit card statement tucked behind others in our mail pile. When I'd asked him about the charges, expensive dinners, hotel stays, purchases I didn't recognize, he'd laughed it off. Just business expenses, honey. You worry too much. Now I understood. He'd been living a double life, and my accident had simply given him the perfect opportunity to complete his escape plan. The betrayal was more than financial. It was deeply personal. It felt like a violation of the very trust that had bound us together, a wound that no medicine could heal. I was left adrift, isolated by the very person I had leaned on the most. The sense of security I had taken for granted was shattered, replaced by a raw vulnerability I was unprepared to face. Nights were when the demons came alive. Alone in that unfamiliar apartment, the silence pressed in on me like a living thing. I wrestled with a storm of emotions: shock, anger, disbelief, and an aching loneliness that seemed to seep into my bones. During one particularly brutal 3 a.m. awakening, I found myself dialing his number, my finger hovering over the call button for 20 minutes before I finally threw the phone across the room. During one particularly restless night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, the smiles, the vacations, the quiet moments of joy. What stopped me cold was a photo from our last anniversary dinner. I was laughing at something he'd said, my face glowing with happiness and trust. But now, looking closer, I could see it. The way his smile didn't reach his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He was already planning his exit even then. Despite the devastation, a small part of me clung to hope. The hope that this wasn't the end. That somehow I could find a way back from this abyss. But the path was unclear, and the weight of betrayal made every step feel heavy and uncertain. I realized that waking up from the coma was only the beginning of another kind of struggle, one that would test my strength and resolve in ways I had never imagined. The hospital nurse, Maria, was a rare bright spot during those early days. She stopped by to check on me, her warmth cutting through the coldness that had settled in my heart. One afternoon, as she adjusted my four, she noticed the stack of bills and gave me a sympathetic look. "It's a lot to take in all at once," she said gently. "But you're stronger than you think. You don't have to face this alone." Then Maria said something that changed everything. "You know, I've seen this before. More often than you'd think. And I can tell you one thing, the women who survive this, who truly rebuild their lives, they all have one thing in common. They get angry. Not bitter but righteously angry. And they use that anger as fuel." Her words planted a seed of courage, fragile but growing. For the first time since waking, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could reclaim my life. That the betrayal, while devastating, didn't have to define me. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but I was no longer willing to be a passive victim of circumstance. In the quiet hours when the city outside dimmed and the hum of daily life slowed to a distant murmur, I found myself trapped in a relentless storm of thoughts. But tonight was different. Tonight I wasn't just replaying the betrayal, I was hunting. I grabbed a notebook and my laptop, spreading bank statements across my bed like a detective's murder board. Every suspicious transaction, every lie I could now identify, every moment when his behavior should have raised red flags. The act of writing transformed my pain into evidence, my confusion into a weapon. Then I found it, the smoking gun I'd been searching for without realizing it. Buried in our joint credit card statements was a pattern so obvious I couldn't believe I'd missed it. Every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 months, $200 cash withdrawals at the same ATM near his office. But those were the days he claimed to work late, the days he said he grabbed dinner at his desk. My hands were shaking as I cross-referenced those dates with his work calendar on our shared Google account. Every single Tuesday and Thursday marked late meeting, don't wait up. The meetings that never appeared on his official work schedule. The meetings that I now realized were with her. I felt like I was watching a thriller unfold, except I was both the detective and the victim. The pattern became crystal clear when I laid out our bank statements chronologically. The way he had grown distant in recent months, the vague answers to my questions about money, the sudden late nights at work he never explained. Each detail, once easy to dismiss, now felt like a piece of a puzzle I was only beginning to see. But the real bombshell came when I hacked into his old laptop. I know it sounds dramatic, but desperation had made me bold. His password was still my birthday. The irony was almost funny. What I found made my stomach turn. Not just emails with Rachel, but detailed spreadsheets. He'd been tracking my medical bills, calculating insurance payouts, planning his exit strategy like a corporate merger. Phase 1. Establish separate accounts, read one document. Phase 2. Transfer funds gradually. Phase 3. Wait for optimal timing. My accident hadn't been his opportunity, it had been his deadline. The image of him, smiling warmly in photographs, felt like a mask that had slipped to reveal a stranger beneath. I remembered the nights we spent planning holidays, the laughter over shared meals, the tender moments that now seemed tainted by the shadow of his betrayal. How could someone I loved so deeply become so alien? There was a deep ache, a sense of violation that went beyond the theft of money. It was the stealing of trust, the breaking of an unspoken bond that had defined my world. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I never had before. The very foundation of my identity, the belief that I could rely on him, had crumbled, leaving me adrift in a sea of doubt. That's when I made the call that changed everything. Instead of calling him, I called the bank's fraud hotline. "I need to report systematic financial abuse," I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. The representative was immediately engaged. Apparently, my situation fit a pattern they'd been trained to recognize. "Ma'am, we're going to flag your accounts immediately and start a formal investigation. Can you be here first thing tomorrow morning with documentation?" I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed but blazing with purpose. "Yes," I said. "And I'm bringing everything." The next morning I walked into that bank like I was going to war. I had 3 folders of evidence, a timeline spanning 18 months, and a fury that had crystallized into laser focus. The fraud specialist, a woman named Janet, looked at my documentation with growing amazement. "In 15 years of doing this job, I've never seen a victim come in this prepared," she said. "Usually people are in denial for months. You've basically built the entire case for us." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "We're going to nail him to the wall." Friends and family reached out, their concern a lifeline in the fog of betrayal. My sister's call came at exactly the right moment. "I know you're hurting," she said, "but I need you to listen to me. Remember when we were kids and Tommy Morrison stole your Halloween candy? You didn't just cry, you marched right to his house and demanded it back. You got every last piece. That girl is still in there. She's just been sleeping." I started a war journal, that's what I called it. I wrote about the man I loved and lost, about the trust shattered, and about the loneliness that wrapped around me like a heavy cloak. Each entry was a small step toward understanding, a way to make sense of the chaos within. Entry number 1. He thought I was weak. He thought I would just accept this. He was wrong. Entry number 7. I found out today that he bought her jewelry with our anniversary money. The necklace I admired in the store window. He bought it, just not for me. Entry number 12. Maria was right. I'm getting angry, and it feels like waking up all over again. I began cautiously, reaching out to a hospital counselor recommended by Maria. Our sessions were tentative at first, my voice shaky as I tried to articulate the storm inside me. Yet, with each conversation I felt a flicker of strength returning. The counselor helped me see that what I was feeling was natural, that healing would take time, and that I had the right to fight for my dignity and future. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window, I sat with the counselor discussing the next steps. "You're waking up not just from a coma," she said thoughtfully, "but from a life that no longer serves you. It's painful, but it's also a chance to rebuild on your terms. Tell me," she continued, leaning forward, "what's the one thing you wish you could say to him right now if there were no consequences?" The question hit me like lightning. Without thinking, I blurted out, "I wish I could tell him that he didn't break me. He stole my money, but he didn't steal my soul." The counselor smiled. "That's your truth. Hold on to that." The real breakthrough came during our 3rd session when she gave me homework that changed my life. "I want you to write down 3 things you're proud of accomplishing since waking up," my counselor said during one particularly difficult session. I stared at the blank paper, thinking I had nothing to write. Then slowly words began flowing. Not just 3 things, but dozens. I confronted him. I hired a lawyer. I'm still here. I uncovered his lies. I protected other potential victims by reporting him. I learned to sleep through the night again. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. Looking at that list, I realized something profound. I hadn't just survived. I had become a force of nature. The woman who wrote these words was not the same person who had woken up broken in that hospital bed. "I have something for you," Maria said during one of her visits. Reaching into her purse, she pulled out a business card. "This is my cousin's wife. She's a lawyer who specializes in cases like yours. She's tough as nails and she doesn't lose." The card felt warm in my hands, like a weapon I was finally ready to wield. Mark showed up at my door at 11 p.m. with a laptop, legal pads, and Chinese takeout. "Cancel your plans for tonight," he said with a grim smile. "We're going to build a case that would make the FBI jealous." We worked until 4 a.m., and what we discovered was staggering. Not just the obvious theft, but a sophisticated network of deception. Shell companies, fake rental properties, even a secret business partnership with Rachel that had been siphoning our money for almost 2 years. "Jesus Christ," Mark whispered as we uncovered another layer. "This isn't just betrayal. This is organized crime." By dawn, we didn't just have evidence. We had a criminal conspiracy mapped out in spreadsheets and flowcharts. My friend Jake brought over pizza and stayed until 2 a.m., helping me organize all the financial documents. "You know what this looks like?" he said, spreading the papers across my coffee table. "It looks like evidence. Detailed, damning evidence. He may have stolen your money, but he also left a paper trail a mile wide." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Really smiled. I reached out to a lawyer recommended by a friend, someone who specialized in financial abuse and marital disputes. Our first meeting was intimidating. The office smelled of leather-bound books and polished wood, a stark contrast to the chaos inside me. But the lawyer listened attentively as I recounted my story, nodding thoughtfully and asking pointed questions. Diana Santos was exactly who I needed, a 5'2" hurricane in a designer suit. The first meeting was legendary. She listened to my story for exactly 12 minutes, then held up her hand. "Stop," she said. "I've heard enough to know 3 things. 1, your husband is an amateur criminal who thinks he's smart. 2, he left a paper trail that could be seen from space. 3, by the time I'm done with him, he's going to wish he'd never learned your name." She opened her laptop and started typing furiously. "We're not just going to get your money back," she continued, her fingers flying across the keys. "We're going to file criminal charges, civil suits, and I'm personally going to make sure he can't even open a checking account without my permission for the next decade." I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. The thrill of having someone truly terrifying on my side. The lawyer explained the steps ahead. Gathering evidence, filing petitions, and the possibility of freezing accounts to prevent further loss. It was a complex process, fraught with emotional and financial hurdles, but it was a path forward. I left the office feeling a cautious sense of empowerment, like the first tentative steps out of a dark tunnel. The evidence kept pouring in. My lawyer had hired a forensic accountant who uncovered a web of financial deception that went back nearly 2 years. "Your husband was systematic about this," Diana explained. "He didn't just steal from you. He planned it meticulously. The good news is that this level of planning makes it impossible for him to claim it was a mistake or temporary lapse in judgment." Meanwhile, I began attending therapy sessions more regularly. The emotional weight of betrayal, combined with the trauma of the accident and hospital stay, was a heavy burden. Therapy became a sanctuary where I could unravel the tangled emotions without fear of judgment. The counselor guided me through the process of processing grief, anger, and the fragile hope that flickered beneath the surface. "I want to show you something," my counselor said during one session, pulling out a small mirror. "Look at yourself and tell me what you see." I stared at my reflection. Stronger jaw, clearer eyes, shoulders held high with confidence I'd forgotten I possessed. "I see a warrior," I said, and for the first time I meant it. As weeks turned into months, the dual paths of legal action and emotional healing intertwined. I found myself becoming more assertive, not just in court-related matters but in daily life. I started setting boundaries with people, saying no when I needed to, and asking for help without shame. Each act was a declaration that I was reclaiming my agency step by step. The breakthrough moment came when I discovered his hidden filing cabinet, one I'd never been allowed to access because he claimed it contained boring business papers. Inside were documents that painted a picture of calculated deception. Secret accounts, loan applications using my credit, and most damning of all, a letter from a private investigator he'd hired to document my daily routines before the accident. He'd been planning this for months. At work, I returned part-time, a tentative step toward financial independence. The routine was both comforting and challenging. I grappled with fatigue and the lingering shadows of trauma, but I pushed forward. Colleagues were supportive, some unaware of the full story, but their kindness was a reminder that life could still hold normalcy amid chaos. My friend Sarah, who worked in banking, offered to review my financial documents with a professional eye. "Honey," she said after 2 hours of analysis, "what he did to you isn't just morally wrong, it's federal crime level wrong. Wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion. He's looking at serious jail time if this goes to criminal court." The validation was overwhelming. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was the victim of multiple felonies. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of organizing documents and attending therapy, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights twinkle like distant stars. The cool night air whispered promises of renewal and strength. I thought about how far I'd come, from the helpless woman waking in a hospital bed to someone actively reclaiming her life. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I no longer felt lost. During one late-night document review session, I found something that stopped me cold. A life insurance policy I'd never seen before. One he'd taken out on me just 3 months before my accident. The beneficiary wasn't him, it was Rachel. My hand shook as I called Diana immediately. "We need to meet tomorrow," I said. "I think this goes deeper than we thought." That night I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. Really laughed. Mark had sent me a text about something ridiculous my ex had tried to claim in his legal response, and the absurdity of it all suddenly struck me as hilariously pathetic. I was no longer afraid of him. I was no longer broken by him. I was free. The moment I resolved to confront him, a fierce clarity settled over me, sharp and unyielding. No longer would I shrink into the shadows of his betrayal, or allow myself to be defined by his deceit. I was done being a silent victim. I would stand up, speak out, and reclaim what was rightfully mine. I spent 3 days preparing for the confrontation like a general planning a battle. I reached out to Mark one evening, my voice steady despite the fluttering in my chest. "I'm ready," I said simply. He didn't hesitate, offering to be by my side when the time came. Mark insisted we practice. "He's going to try to gaslight you to make you doubt yourself," he warned. "So we're going to rehearse until you can say what you need to say, even if he's screaming at you." We spent hours role-playing, with Mark playing the most manipulative version of my husband he could imagine. By the time we were done, I was armored in my own truth. The confrontation was strategic theater, and I was the lead actress. The day we met was heavy with unspoken emotions, but I arrived prepared with something he hadn't expected: complete emotional detachment. I practiced this moment for weeks with my therapist, and now I was ready. We met in a small conference room at the lawyer's office, sterile and unyielding, a fitting stage for the reckoning that was about to unfold. He arrived with a guarded expression, his eyes flickering with a mixture of defiance and apprehension. I sat across from him, flanked by my lawyer and Mark, whose steady presence gave me courage. He tried to stand and hug me, but I remained seated, my hands folded calmly on the table. "Sit down, David," I said, my voice carrying an authority I hadn't known I possessed. The confusion that flashed across his face was the first small victory, but I was just getting started. "I know about the $347,000 you stole from our accounts. I know about Rachel. I know about the shell companies, the fake rental properties, and the business partnership you've been hiding for 2 years." Each revelation landed like a physical blow. His face went through a fascinating progression: confusion, fear, panic, and finally, a desperate attempt at damage control. "I also know about the life insurance policy you took out on me 3 months before my accident, the one where Rachel is the beneficiary." This was the knockout punch. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. For the first time in our marriage, I held all the power. "But here's what you don't know," I continued, savoring every word. "I know about the private investigator you hired to document my routines. I know about the cryptocurrency accounts. And most importantly, I know that the FBI is very interested in financial crimes involving attempted insurance fraud." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Mark looked stunned. I'd been holding back some details to maximize their impact in this moment. My lawyer began by laying out the evidence, bank statements, transaction records, and correspondence that painted an undeniable picture of deceit. There was no room left for ambiguity. The truth was laid bare. I watched as his face tightened, the mask slipping to reveal the man who had tried to hide behind lies. He tried to deflect, to rationalize his actions with half-truths and blame. "You don't understand the pressure I was under," he said, but the words fell flat against the weight of evidence. I refused to be swayed or silenced. "Pressure doesn't justify betrayal," I replied firmly. "I'm done being invisible in this story." His lawyer, a nervous man who kept glancing at his client with poorly concealed disappointment, tried to interrupt. "My client is prepared to offer a settlement." Diana cut him off with a laugh. "Your client is prepared to go to federal prison. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The FBI is very interested in this case." The moment that defined everything came when he tried one last manipulation. "You're being unreasonable," he said, reaching across the table as if to take my hand. "We can work this out. I still love you." I looked down at his hand, then directly into his eyes. Love doesn't steal. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't abandon someone in their darkest hour. Whatever you think you feel, it isn't love. I stood up. And what I feel for you isn't love anymore either. It's pity. The confrontation was exhausting. A tangled mix of anger, sorrow, and determination. Yet, when I left the cafe that day, I felt a shift within me. A release from the weight of silence and invisibility. I had spoken my truth aloud, and in doing so, I had taken the first real step toward empowerment. As we walked away, Mark put his arm around my shoulders. "You know what just happened in there?" he asked. "You didn't just confront him, you conquered him. Did you see how small he looked by the end?" I had seen it. The man who had once seemed so powerful, so in control, had crumbled under the weight of his own lies. In the days that followed, I found strength in the small victories. I began gathering more evidence of his financial misconduct, organizing documents with Mark's help and sharing them with my lawyer. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the foundation of my new life, a testament to my refusal to be victimized any longer. The first major victory came when the judge granted an emergency injunction freezing all of his assets. Diana called me with the news, her voice triumphant. "He tried to move more money this morning," she said. "But we stopped him. The account transfers were blocked, and now he's facing contempt charges too. He's trapped and he knows it." The day the court ruled in my favor arrived like a quiet storm, unexpected yet undeniable, a culmination of months of struggle, courage, and relentless pursuit of justice. Sitting in the sterile courtroom, I felt a surge of emotions, relief, vindication, and a cautious hope that this chapter of my life might finally begin to close. Judge Martinez looked directly at me as she delivered her ruling. "Mrs. Williams," she said, "the court finds that you have been the victim of systematic financial abuse and fraud. The defendant's actions were not only morally reprehensible, but criminally negligent." Those words, victim, abuse, fraud, somehow gave my pain legitimacy in a way that months of therapy hadn't quite achieved. It was not a victory that called for celebration, at least not in the way I had imagined. Instead, it was a reckoning, an acknowledgement of the injustice I had endured and a formal restitution of what I had lost. The financial compensation was necessary, a tangible step toward rebuilding, but it did not erase the years of betrayal, the sleepless nights, or the erosion of trust. It was, however, a powerful affirmation that I was no longer invisible. As the judge's gavel fell, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year. A sense of being heard, truly heard, by someone in a position of power. The legal system, for all its flaws, had seen my truth and declared it valid. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd of reporters waited. Diana had warned me they might be there. My case had drawn attention because of its complexity and the large sum involved. "Mrs. Williams," one called out, "how do you feel about the ruling?" I paused, thinking of all the women who might be watching, all the victims still suffering in silence. "I feel hopeful," I said. "Hopeful that other women will see this and know that fighting back is possible." The day Diana called with the settlement news, I was gardening, actually gardening in soil I owned in a yard that belonged to me. We got everything, she said, her voice triumphant. Full restitution plus $200,000 in damages, all legal fees paid, and here's the best part. He's pleading guilty to federal wire fraud charges. He's looking at 18 months minimum. I sat down hard in my garden, dirt still on my hands, and started laughing. Not bitter laughter, but the kind of pure joy that comes from watching the universe restore its balance. There's more, Diana continued. The feds found out he pulled this same scam on his previous girlfriend 5 years ago. You weren't his first victim, but you're definitely going to be his last. That night I threw a party. Not a celebration of his downfall, but a celebration of my survival, my strength, my incredible friends who had carried me through hell and back. As I watched my little house fill with people who loved me, really loved me, not the version of me that was useful to them, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed: complete contentment. In the days that followed, I took time to process the ruling. The legal victory brought practical relief. The frozen accounts were unfrozen, bills could be paid, and the path to financial stability was clearer. But more profoundly, it brought emotional closure. I no longer felt trapped in the silence of betrayal. My voice had been heard and validated. Financially, the ruling was a lifeline. I could pay overdue bills, secure housing, and begin rebuilding savings that had been decimated. I met with a financial advisor recommended by my lawyer, someone who helped me create a plan for stability and growth. The prospect of taking control over my finances was both daunting and exhilarating. The financial advisor, Mrs. Chun, spread out charts and projections across her desk. With proper planning, she said, you'll not only recover what was stolen, you'll be in a better financial position than before. You've learned lessons about protecting yourself that most people never have to learn. That knowledge is power. The day I moved into the small apartment that Mark had arranged for me felt like stepping into a new chapter. Fragile and uncertain, but undeniably mine. The space was modest, with sunlit windows and creaky wooden floors, but it was a sanctuary away from the shadows of betrayal and loss. Standing in the empty living room with boxes stacked around me, I made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to rush to fill this space with things. Instead, I was going to be intentional about every choice, every piece of furniture, every color on the walls. This apartment would be a reflection of who I was becoming, not who I used to be. What's the first thing you want to do in your new place? Mark asked as we assembled my new desk. I thought for a moment, then smiled. Cook myself breakfast and eat it in my underwear if I want to. We both laughed, but underneath the humor was something profound: the freedom to live by my own rules for the first time in years. My manager, Linda, called me into her office after my first week back. I braced myself for a conversation about my performance, but instead she said, I don't know what you've been through, but I can see you're fighting your way back from something hard. If you need anything, flexible hours, time off for appointments, whatever, just ask. The kindness of relative strangers still had the power to move me to tears. The apartment became a canvas for this new life. I painted the walls soft colors, hung photos of friends and places that inspired me, and filled the shelves with books that spoke to resilience and hope. Each choice was an assertion of my identity, a declaration that I was reclaiming my space in the world. The day I hung my first piece of art, a painting I'd done in therapy that depicted a tree growing through concrete, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just an apartment I was renting. This was becoming home. My home. I started a blog called After the Storm, where I shared my journey anonymously. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of women reached out to share their own stories of financial abuse, betrayal, and recovery. I realized my pain had a purpose: to light the way for others walking the same dark path. My college roommate, Jessica, came to visit and brought a bottle of champagne. What are we celebrating? I asked. She smiled. The fact that you're still here. The fact that you fought back. The fact that you're building something beautiful from the ashes. We drank champagne and ordered pizza, and for the first time in over a year, I felt genuinely joyful. As legal proceedings progressed, I prepared for hearings and meetings with a sense of purpose. I was no longer overwhelmed by fear or doubt, but fueled by a determination to secure a future free from the shadows of betrayal. Each session with my lawyer was an opportunity to advocate for myself, to claim what was rightfully mine. Standing in my apartment one evening, Looking at the life I'd built from nothing, I felt profound accomplishment. The court ruling hadn't just given me my money back. It had given me something far more valuable. The unshakable knowledge that I was worth fighting for. With the court's ruling behind me, a new chapter began, not one marked by loss or betrayal, but by hard-won independence and the quiet rebuilding of my life on my own terms. Embracing this newfound freedom was both exhilarating and daunting. I was no longer tethered to a past defined by someone else's choices. I was free to chart a course defined by my own values, desires, and hopes. The first decision I made in my new life was symbolic but profound. I bought myself flowers. Not for any special occasion, not because someone else thought I deserved them, but simply because I wanted beauty in my space and I had the power to create it. Those sunflowers on my kitchen table became a daily reminder that joy was a choice I could make. I focused on cultivating a strong support network, understanding that healing and growth were not solitary endeavors. Friends who had stood by me through the darkest times became anchors, and I sought out new connections that nurtured my spirit. I joined local groups centered around writing and wellness, spaces where I could share my experiences and learn from others. These communities became a source of strength and validation, reminding me that I was not alone in my journey. At my first support group meeting, I was terrified to speak. But when I shared my story, something magical happened. Other women began nodding, reaching out to touch my hand, sharing their own experiences. We weren't just survivors. We were witnesses to each other's strength. That room became sacred space where shame had no power. Investing time in self-care became a priority. After years of neglecting my own needs while caught in the whirlwind of caregiving and crisis, I learned to listen to my body and mind with compassion. I carved out daily rituals, morning stretches, quiet moments with a cup of tea, journaling, that grounded me and fostered resilience. These small acts were revolutionary. They were declarations that I mattered. I started taking art classes on Tuesday evenings. The instructor, an elderly woman named Rose, watched me paint with fierce concentration. "You paint like you're trying to reclaim something," she observed. She was right. Every brushstroke was an act of reclaiming my creative spirit, my right to make beautiful things just because I wanted to. Therapy continued to be a vital part of my growth. I explored layers of identity beyond the trauma, uncovering passions and strengths that had long been dormant. The counselor helped me challenge limiting beliefs, teaching me to embrace my worthiness and to trust in my capacity to shape my future. Sessions became laboratories for transformation, where I practiced self-compassion and envisioned possibilities beyond survival. As I nurtured my emotional well-being, I also strengthened my financial independence. I took on a full-time position that aligned with my skills, offering not just income but a sense of purpose and accomplishment. Budgeting became an empowering tool, a way to assert control over my resources and plan for stability. Each paycheck was a milestone, a testament to my capability and self-reliance. The day I received my first full paycheck from my new position, I did something that surprised even me. I opened a savings account labeled Dreams. It was a small start, but it represented something huge. The belief that I deserved to have dreams again, and the confidence that I could make them reality. My relationship with Mark deepened, founded on mutual respect and trust. He was not just a friend but a partner in this journey, offering unwavering support without judgment. Our conversations ranged from practical matters to dreams and fears, creating a shared space where vulnerability was met with kindness. This connection was a balm to wounds left by betrayal, reminding me that healthy relationships were possible. Gradually, I reclaimed parts of my identity that had been obscured by pain. I revisited hobbies that once brought joy, painting, writing, reading, and allowed creativity to flow without pressure or expectation. These pursuits were acts of reclaiming my voice and soul, affirming that I was more than the sum of my hardships. I started writing a book, not about my experience, but a novel about a detective solving crimes. It was pure escapism, pure joy, pure creativity divorced from trauma. The act of creating something entirely fictional felt like the ultimate freedom, proof that my imagination belonged to me alone. Socially, I expanded my circle, attending community events and workshops that fostered connection and growth. I found solace in shared stories and collective resilience, drawing strength from the tapestry of human experience. These interactions rekindled a sense of belonging and hope that had been dimmed but never extinguished. At times, the weight of the past surfaced, a trigger in a conversation, a sudden wave of grief, but I faced these moments with the tools and support I had cultivated. I learned that healing was not linear and that setbacks were part of the process, not failures. Each challenge met with courage deepened my resilience and self-awareness. One particularly difficult day, I found myself crying in my car after a seemingly innocent comment from a coworker about lucky wives who don't have to work. Instead of spiraling into shame, I called my therapist, talked through the trigger, and then treated myself to lunch at my favorite restaurant. I was learning to be gentle with myself while refusing to be derailed by others' thoughtless words. Professionally, I began exploring opportunities for further development, considering courses and certifications that aligned with my interests. The prospect of growth and learning was a beacon, illuminating possibilities beyond survival. I envisioned a future where my work was not just a means of income, but an expression of purpose and passion. Financially, I met with advisors to plan for long-term security, understanding that stability was foundational to freedom. I developed a savings plan, explored investments, and set goals that reflected my values and aspirations. This proactive approach was a radical shift from the vulnerability I had once endured. I bought a small house 6 months later. Nothing fancy, but it had good bones and a garden where I could grow things. The day I got the keys, I sat on the front porch steps and cried. They were tears of gratitude, of disbelief, of pure joy. I had a home that belonged to me alone. Emotionally, I nurtured forgiveness, not for him but for myself. I released the burden of blame and self-doubt that had weighed heavily, embracing acceptance and compassion. This internal shift was transformative, freeing me from the chains of anger that threatened to consume me. In moments of quiet reflection, I acknowledged the woman I had become. A survivor, a fighter, a creator of her own destiny. The journey from betrayal to empowerment was ongoing, filled with complexities and triumphs. I was no longer defined by past wounds but by the strength forged in their crucible. Looking back at my old journals, I was amazed by the transformation. The woman who had written those early entries, broken, terrified, lost, felt like someone I had known long ago. Not forgotten but transformed. She had been the seed. I was the tree that grew from her ashes. As I looked toward the horizon, I felt a profound sense of possibility. The future was mine to shape, unbound by the shadows of yesterday. I carried scars, yes, but also wisdom and courage. I was ready to embrace life fully, authentically, and on my own terms. A woman approached my table hesitantly one afternoon as I sat in a cafe writing. "Excuse me," she said, "but I read your blog. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm going through something similar, and your words, they're giving me courage to fight back." As she walked away, I realized my pain had transformed into purpose. I wasn't just healing, I was helping others heal too. The story I was writing now was one of resilience, hope, and self-discovery. A narrative where my voice was heard, my worth recognized, and my dreams honored. It was a testament to the enduring human spirit and the capacity to rise, rebuild, and thrive. Epilogue. Full circle. 2 years later, I received a phone call that stopped me cold. "Mrs. Williams? This is Detective Sarachan with the Financial Crimes Unit. We've been following your case, and I wanted you to know, your ex-husband has been arrested again. Apparently, he was running the same con from prison through an accomplice." I started laughing. Not because it was funny, but because it proved something I'd suspected all along. Some people never learn. But some people like me learn everything. "There's something else," Detective Chen continued. 3 other women have come forward with similar stories. They all read your blog and realized what had happened to them. Your decision to speak out publicly has helped us build a pattern that's going to put him away for a very long time. That's when I knew my pain had become my purpose. The blog had grown into a nonprofit. The nonprofit had become a movement. I was no longer just a victim who had survived. I was a force that was actively protecting other women from experiencing what I had endured. Standing in the office of my nonprofit that afternoon, looking at the wall covered with thank you letters from women we'd helped escape financial abuse, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not the end of my story, but the transformation of my trauma into something that mattered. I had learned that true victory wasn't measured solely in legal rulings or recovered finances, but in the reclaiming of dignity and the courage to envision a future unshackled by the past. The court's decision had been a turning point, yes, but it was the daily acts of self-care, the boundaries set, and the friendships nurtured that breathed life into my renewal. The woman I had become was no longer defined by betrayal or loss, but by strength and authenticity. I embraced the complexity of my story, the pain alongside the growth, the scars alongside the hope. Each day was an opportunity to write a new chapter, one where my voice held power and my choices reflected my true self. I found joy in the small moments, a morning walk bathed in golden light, the laughter shared with friends, the quiet satisfaction of a day lived on my own terms. These were the threads that wove together a life reclaimed from darkness, a life where I was no longer invisible but fully alive. My relationship with Mark had blossomed into a partnership built on trust, respect, and mutual healing. Together we shared dreams and plans, knowing that the past no longer dictated our future. His presence was a reminder that connection, when grounded in honesty and care, could be a source of strength rather than vulnerability. Our wedding was small, intimate, held in the garden of my little house. As I spoke my vows, I wasn't just promising to love him. I was declaring my faith in love itself, my belief that trust could be rebuilt, that hearts could heal. The woman who had once been afraid to believe in anyone now stood ready to believe in us. Professionally, I pursued opportunities that aligned with my passions and values, stepping into roles that challenged me and allowed me to grow. The confidence I had reclaimed permeated every aspect of my life, opening doors I once thought closed forever. I continued to write, sharing my story through a blog that connected me to others who had faced betrayal and loss. The act of storytelling became a lifeline, a way to transform pain into purpose, and to foster a community of resilience. The messages of support and solidarity I received affirmed that vulnerability was a source of power, not weakness. The blog became a book, then a speaking tour, then a nonprofit organization helping women escape financial abuse. What had started as my personal journal of pain had become a movement that touched thousands of lives. Sometimes I marveled at the strange alchemy that had transformed my worst experience into my greatest purpose. The scars of the past remained, silent reminders of what I had endured and overcome, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they were part of the mosaic of my identity, testaments to survival and strength. I carried them with grace, aware that healing was a lifelong journey. In moments of reflection, I acknowledged the profound lessons learned, that trust begins with oneself, that boundaries are acts of love, and that the courage to reclaim one's life is the greatest victory of all. I understood that my worth was inherent, not contingent on others' actions or approval. On quiet Sunday mornings, I would sit in my garden with coffee and watch things grow. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. I too had grown from darkness, pushing through concrete circumstances to find light. The woman in the hospital bed felt like a different person now, someone I remembered with compassion but no longer was. As I looked toward the horizon, I embraced the uncertainty with open arms, confident in my ability to navigate whatever came next. The past, while part of my story, was no longer a cage but a foundation from which I soared. As I stood at the threshold of this new life, the journey behind me unfolded like a tapestry woven with pain, resilience, and quiet victories. I thought back to the woman who had woken from a coma, disoriented and betrayed, unsure if she would ever find solid ground again. The path from helplessness to empowerment had been neither straight nor easy, but it was mine, marked by choices to fight, to heal, and ultimately to trust myself. I stood not at an end but at a beginning, ready to live authentically, to love fully, and to create a life imbued with purpose and joy. The journey had been arduous, but it had led me to a place of profound self-discovery and freedom. And in that freedom I found peace.